I can still hear those words echoing in my head, words that cut deeper than any knife ever could. It was my son's birthday. The house smelled of cake and laughter. Balloons floated lazily near the ceiling, and a soft tune played from the speakers. He stood there, tall, confident, wearing the same smile that once melted my heart when he was 5. Only this time, that smile carried something else, something cold. I walked toward him with a gift in my hands, a leather-bound journal I had spent weeks finding, engraved with his name, because I wanted him to write his own story. But before I could hand it to him, he looked me straight in the eyes and said the words that would change my life forever. "Dad, the best gift you could give me would be to disappear." For a moment, everything went silent. The music stopped, the laughter vanished, even the air felt heavy. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. Maybe he was joking. Maybe the crowd would laugh, and we'd all breathe again. But they didn't. And neither did he. His expression didn't change. He meant it. That single sentence shattered 40 years of fatherhood. I felt the ground leave my feet, as if my soul had been pushed off a cliff. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every dream I built for him, turned to dust in an instant. My name is Thomas Gray, 68 years old, and what I'm about to tell you isn't just a story. It's a confession. Because sometimes, life doesn't destroy you with tragedy, it destroys you with silence. And sometimes, silence is the most painful sound a father can hear. I built my entire world around my son. I made sure he'd never know the hunger I once knew, the cold I once slept through, or the tears my father once hid from me. I worked, I struggled, I gave, and I believed that love would be enough. But standing there that night, I realized something terrible. Even love has an expiration date when gratitude dies. I didn't shout. I didn't argue. I didn't even cry, not there, not in front of those strangers who pretended not to hear. I just smiled, placed the gift on the table, and whispered, "Happy birthday, son." Then I turned around and walked away, not just from the party, but from my old life. Because in that moment, I understood something every parent fears but rarely admits. Sometimes the child you raise with your whole heart grows into someone who no longer remembers the hands that fed him. That night, I drove without direction. Street lights blurred past the windshield like falling stars, and I kept hearing his voice again and again, "The best gift would be if you disappeared." He didn't know it yet, but I was about to give him exactly what he asked for. And when I did, he'd finally learn what it means to lose something that money can never replace. So before I tell you how I disappeared, let me take you back, to the beginning, to where it all started, to the boy I once held in my arms and the promise I made that would one day destroy us both. When I was young, the world never gave me anything for free. My story began in a small rusted apartment on the south side of Detroit, where the walls sweated in summer and froze in winter. My father was a mechanic, my mother washed clothes for neighbors, and I grew up believing that enough was something other people had. By the time I turned 14, I was already working at a steel workshop after school, sweeping floors, scrubbing oil stains, saving coins in an old glass jar that once held pickles. That jar became my first dream. Every coin I dropped inside wasn't money, it was a promise that one day my family would never have to beg, that I'd give my children the comfort I never had. And for years, that single dream kept me alive. When I met Linda, I was 21, broke and covered in grease, but she saw something in me that I couldn't see myself, hope. She was a nurse's assistant with tired eyes and the softest heart I'd ever known. We built our lives out of nothing. When I opened my first small car repair garage, she used her savings to buy the first set of tools. We worked side by side, her keeping the books, me fixing engines. We didn't have much, but we had love, and we had faith that our struggle meant something. Then, 5 years later, Ethan was born. The day I held him in my arms, every coin from that old pickle jar flashed before my eyes. All those nights I'd gone hungry so I could save $1, they suddenly made sense. I whispered to my newborn son, "You'll never know what hunger feels like." From that day, my purpose became singular. I didn't just want to provide, I wanted to build a fortress of comfort around my boy. I worked 16 hours a day, sometimes 7 days a week. I missed birthdays, anniversaries, family dinners, all because I thought sacrifice was the purest form of love. I expanded the garage, then opened a chain of service stations. Each one carried my name, Gray Motors. I watched my logo glow over city streets, and every time I saw it, I imagined Ethan's future, bright, easy, secure. But life has a cruel sense of irony. The more I built, the less I was home. The more money I earned, the less my son spoke to me. I convinced myself it was temporary, that one day he'd understand. That one day he'd look back and say, "My father gave me everything." By the time Ethan entered college, we had moved into a house twice the size of the one I grew up in. Marble floors, a backyard pool, a car for him before his 18th birthday. I gave him everything I had ever wished for. But somewhere between giving him everything and asking for nothing, I forgot the one thing no money could buy, gratitude. Still, I kept believing that love was enough. I ignored the distance. I excused his tone. I told myself it was just youth, just modern times, just the way things are. I didn't realize that my endless giving wasn't earning his respect, it was erasing it. If I had known then that the same dream that lifted me out of poverty would one day make my own son look down on me, maybe I would have stopped building so soon. But I didn't. Because fathers don't stop dreaming, even when their dreams start destroying them. Ethan grew up surrounded by comfort, the kind of comfort that dulls gratitude and sharpens pride. He never had to share a room, never wore the same jacket 2 winters in a row, never worried about how much milk cost or if the power bill was paid. Everything he wanted appeared before he even learned how to ask. And I was proud of that. Proud and blind. When he turned 16, I handed him the keys to a car. A used sedan, clean and safe. He took them without a smile. "Thanks," he muttered, his eyes still on his phone. I told myself it was just teenage manners. He'd understand one day. Every father tells himself that lie. By college, he had transformed into someone I barely recognized. Confident, charming, always dressed sharp, always busy. He studied business management at a private university, the same one that had rejected me decades ago because I couldn't afford the tuition. Every time I visited, he'd introduce me as, "This is my dad, he runs some auto shops." So, those auto shops had paid for his education, his car, his apartment, and every single luxury he took for granted. But to him, saying his father was a mechanic, even a successful one, was embarrassing. Linda used to tell me gently, "Tom, don't take it personally. He's young. Let him find his way." And I wanted to believe her. But each time Ethan spoke to me, his words carried less warmth and more distance, as if I was an obligation, a shadow from a past he was trying to escape. When he graduated, I threw him a celebration that filled our backyard with lights, laughter, and music. He gave a little speech, thanking everyone who supported him. Everyone except me. I stood there, clapping with a smile that felt like it was stitched onto my face, pretending I didn't notice. Then came the business. Ethan wanted to start a car tech startup, some kind of digital system to connect auto services online. "Dad, this is the future," he told me, his eyes glowing with ambition. "You wouldn't understand, but I could really use your investment." I didn't hesitate. I sold one of my workshops and handed him a check for $400,000. "This isn't a gift," I said. "It's your chance to build something of your own." He hugged me, the last sincere hug he'd ever give. For a while, things looked good. He hired a team, got an office, and even featured on a local business podcast. Every time someone said, "Gray Motors" and "innovation" in the same sentence, my chest swelled with pride. My son, I thought, was finally walking his own path. But slowly I began to notice the silence. The calls stopped. The visits grew fewer. When I did manage to see him, he'd speak to me like I was an employee, not a father. "Dad, don't worry about the details," he'd say. "You wouldn't get it." I would just nod, hiding the sting behind a tired smile. Then one evening, Linda showed me something on social media. Ethan at a business event, smiling beside investors. The caption read, "Ethan Gray, self-made entrepreneur, founder of Gray Tech." Self-made. That night, I didn't sleep. I just sat in my study, staring at that picture. Self-made, as if I had been a ghost his whole life. As if my sweat, my sacrifices, my very existence meant nothing. Still, I told myself to stay proud. Maybe he'd come around one day. Maybe success had just blinded him temporarily. But deep inside, a quiet voice whispered something I didn't want to hear. He hadn't forgotten who I was. He'd erased me on purpose. And what hurt most wasn't that he no longer needed me, it was that he didn't want to remember me. It began with small things, subtle words, soft tones, looks that stung more than any slap could. At first, I told myself it was stress. Ethan was busy, building his company, finding his place in the world. He's just under pressure, I used to tell Linda. He'll come around. But I was wrong. Pressure doesn't turn love cold, pride does. One evening, I stopped by his office unannounced, a box of pastries in hand, the kind Linda used to bake for him as a kid. I thought it would make him smile, remind him of home. When I stepped inside, I found him in a glass meeting room surrounded by young executives in tailored suits. The moment he saw me through the glass, his face changed, not with joy but discomfort. He stepped out quickly, closing the door behind him. "Dad," he said in a low voice, "you should have called first. I just wanted to drop by, son. Thought I'd surprise you." I held up the pastries with a grin. He looked at them like they were relics from another world. "I appreciate it, but I'm in a meeting. You really can't just show up here." The words, "can't just show up," echoed in my mind all night. I had been part of every brick that built his life, and now I needed permission to enter it. That night, Linda tried to comfort me. "He's just growing up, Tom," she whispered. "Sometimes children pull away before they realize what they're losing." But deep down, I could feel it. I wasn't losing him. He was letting me go. Months passed. The distance widened like a quiet storm. When I called, his replies were short, distracted. When we did meet, Patricia, his wife, would find reasons to leave the room. And when she stayed, her eyes said what her words didn't. "You don't belong here." One Sunday afternoon, I drove over to bring a gift for my grandson, a small model car just like the ones Ethan and I used to fix together. Patricia opened the door. She smiled politely, that cold smile people use when they're waiting for you to leave. "Oh, Tom, you didn't call." "I just wanted to see the little one," I said softly. "I won't stay long." She sighed. "It's just, he's napping right now. Maybe another time." I nodded and handed her the box. "Then give it to him when he wakes up." She took it without a word and closed the door slowly, almost carefully, like she didn't want to wake a ghost. That night, I sat on the porch of my quiet house, the wind brushing through the leaves, and I realized something that hurt more than anything before. I wasn't being forgotten. I was being erased. Ethan still called occasionally, but only when he needed something. A loan, a favor, a signature for a deal. Each time, I told myself this was my chance to win him back, to remind him who I was. Each time, I hoped for a "thanks, Dad." Each time, I was disappointed. Then one day, Linda looked at me and said something I'll never forget. "You've raised a son who doesn't understand the price of love because you never made him pay it." She was right. I had given him everything: comfort, money, freedom, and in return, he had forgotten the meaning of respect. And as cruel as it sounds, sometimes it takes losing everything to finally see who someone truly is. I didn't know it yet, but the moment that truth fully revealed itself would come on the night of his 35th birthday, the night my heart would finally break and the father inside me would die. The night of Ethan's 35th birthday should have been a celebration. For weeks I told myself this would be the moment we reconnected, father and son, success and sacrifice side by side again. I even rehearsed what I'd say: "I'm proud of you, son." Simple words, but honest ones. That afternoon, I drove across town to buy him something meaningful, not expensive, meaningful. In a jewelry shop window, I saw a silver watch engraved with the words, "Time is the truest gift." It felt perfect. After all, time was the one thing I had given him my whole life, and the one thing he'd stopped giving me. When I reached his house, cars lined both sides of the street. Laughter spilled from the windows, music thumped through the walls. For a moment, I smiled, until I realized I hadn't been invited. No message, no call. Still, I convinced myself it was an oversight. Maybe he'd planned a surprise. Maybe he'd be happy to see me. Fathers are the last to stop hoping. I rang the bell. Patricia opened the door. Her smile froze the second she saw me. "Oh, what are you doing here?" "I came to wish my son a happy birthday." I lifted the small box with the watch. "Just wanted to give him this." She didn't move aside. Her eyes darted into the crowded living room behind her. "It's a private party," she said quickly. "Mostly colleagues. It's not really family." Not really family. The words hit like ice water. "Just tell him I'm here," I said quietly. She sighed, turned, and vanished into the noise. From the doorway, I could see the lights, the people, my grandson darting between them with a slice of cake in his hand. I waited. 1 minute. 3. Finally, Ethan appeared, looking handsome, confident, everything I dreamed he would become. "Dad," he said, his voice flat. "You shouldn't have come." I smiled anyway. "I just wanted to see you, son. To tell you how proud I am." I handed him the gift. "For you." He hesitated, then took it like a burden, not a gift. "Thanks, but this really isn't a good time. These are my friends from work. It's kind of not the place for me." I finished for him. He swallowed. "I didn't mean it like that." "But you did," I said softly. The room behind him was full of strangers cheering, drinking, living, and yet I had never felt more alone. At that moment, one of his guests stumbled to the door, half drunk. "Hey, Ethan. Who's the old guy?" "Your landlord." Ethan's face paled. He laughed awkwardly. No, just a neighbor." Neighbor. That single word broke me. Not the rejection, not the embarrassment, the word. In his world, I wasn't a father anymore. Just another man from the neighborhood. I felt my throat tighten, but I forced a smile. "A neighbor," I repeated quietly. "But I was just leaving." "Dad, wait." But I didn't. I turned, walked down the driveway, and into the cold night air. My hands trembled, not from age, but from the weight of 40 years collapsing inside me. Behind me, I heard my grandson's small voice calling, "Grandpa," before Patricia's sharper one cut through it. "Inside, Matthew." The sound of that door closing was the sound of something dying, not just love, but belonging. Driving home that night, the city lights blurred like tears I refused to shed. I had built an empire for my son, but I couldn't buy a place in his heart. And as I parked in front of my quiet house, I made a decision I never thought I'd make. If my presence was a burden, then my absence would be my gift. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark and whispered to the silence, "You wanted me gone, son. So be it." But what Ethan didn't know was that when a father disappears, he doesn't just walk away. He takes the foundation with him. The next morning, I woke to a silence so thick it felt alive. The phone didn't ring. No message came. No one knocked. For the first time in my life, I didn't have a reason to get up, no job calling me, no family waiting for me, no son needing my advice. Only emptiness and the echo of his words, "The best gift would be if you disappeared." So I decided to give him his gift. But not in the way he expected. I spent the entire day sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that went cold hours ago. I stared at the walls that Linda once painted, at the photos she'd framed, Ethan in his graduation gown, our family standing in front of my first workshop, her smile frozen in time. It hit me then that maybe disappearing didn't mean running away. Maybe it meant removing myself from the life of those who never valued me. The next morning, I drove to the bank. I sat across from my advisor, a woman who'd known me for years, and quietly signed away the ties that held Ethan's world together. The company he'd built with my money? My name was still on the founding documents. The house he lived in? The mortgage was under my signature. His cars, his loans, his independence? All built on the foundation of my trust. By noon, I had called my lawyer and said 7 words that changed everything. "It's time to close every door, Richard." He didn't ask questions. He just said, "You're sure?" I nodded. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. We spent hours going through contracts, loan agreements, business titles. Every page I signed was another brick removed from the castle my son had built on my back. Every signature felt like both punishment and liberation. When the last document was sealed, Richard said, "You know this will crush him." I looked out the window, watching the city I'd worked my whole life to build under, and said quietly, "No, Richard. This will save him." Because a man who's never known loss can never know gratitude. That night, I drove to the cemetery. The sky was gray, the wind biting cold. I stood before Linda's grave and spoke aloud as if she were standing next to me. "You were right, honey. I gave too much. I mistook comfort for love. I thought sacrifice could replace respect. I thought if I gave him everything, he'd never forget who gave it to him." I knelt beside her headstone. "But you'll see now, he'll learn. Not through my money, not through my advice, but through absence. Through silence. Through the kind of lesson only life can teach." The next morning, Ethan's world began to crack. I didn't answer when he called the first time. Or the fifth. By the 10th, I finally picked up. His voice trembled. "Dad, what is this? I just got notices from the bank, the mortgage, the company, everything's frozen. What's going on?" I took a slow breath. "It means, son, you finally got your wish." "What?" he stammered. I disappeared. For a long time, there was silence on the other end. Then came a small, broken sound. Not anger, not pride, fear. The sound of a man realizing the ground beneath him was gone. "Dad, please," he whispered. "You can't do this." If I could. And I had. "Ethan," I said quietly, "you wanted to be independent. This is what independence looks like. Now stand on your own 2 feet." And before he could speak again, I hung up. That night, for the first time in years, I slept without a weight on my chest. Because sometimes, the greatest peace a man can find is in finally being gone. 2 weeks passed before I saw him again. He didn't call this time. He just showed up, standing on my driveway with his head down and his hands shaking. For the first time in years, Ethan didn't look like a man in control. He looked like the boy I once held after a nightmare. When I opened the door, he didn't speak. He just stood there, eyes red, face pale. "Dad," he finally whispered, "I lost everything." I said nothing. I just stepped aside and let him in. He sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd once taught him how to balance his first allowance. Only now, the lessons were heavier. "The house," he said quietly, "the cars, they're gone. The company's shut down. Patricia left with Matthew to stay with her parents." His voice cracked. "I ruined everything." I took a deep breath. "No, son. You didn't ruin everything. You just finally saw what was real." He looked up at me, tears brimming. "Dad, I was so wrong. I thought success meant doing it all without help. I thought independence meant pushing you away. But now I understand, I wasn't independent. I was blind." For a long time, I just watched him. The same man who once called me outdated, who introduced me as just a neighbor. But sitting there, stripped of pride, I saw my son again. Not the entrepreneur, not the arrogant voice that broke me, just Ethan, my boy. I reached into my pocket and placed a sealed envelope on the table. His eyes widened. "What's this?" "Your second chance," I said. "Inside is a check for $500,000. Enough to start again, but not the way you think." He shook his head. "Dad, I don't deserve this." "You're right," I said. "You don't. Not yet. I'm not giving it to you, I'm giving you a promise. When you can look me in the eye and tell me you've rebuilt yourself with honesty, with humility, with respect, then that envelope will be yours." He cried then, quietly, the way men cry when words fail. "I'll earn it, Dad. I swear I'll earn it. But please, can Matthew still visit you?" I smiled faintly. "My door will always be open for him, and for you, when you remember that family isn't a contract, it's a choice." That day, Ethan left with nothing but his pride broken, and I stayed behind with something far more valuable: peace. Because sometimes love isn't about holding on. Sometimes it's about letting go just long enough for someone to find their way back. And he did. Months later, Ethan returned again, not with a check in hand, but with his son. Matthew ran up the steps shouting, "Grandpa," and wrapped his little arms around me. Ethan stood behind him, silent but smiling, the kind of smile that only comes from understanding what loss truly costs. For the first time in years, we sat together as a family. No money, no arrogance, just truth. Ethan looked at me and said softly, "You were right, Dad. The greatest gift wasn't your money. It was your silence. Because in that silence, I finally heard everything you tried to teach me. And in that moment, I knew, sometimes disappearing isn't the end of love. It's the only way it survives." 2 weeks passed before I saw him again. He didn't call this time. He just showed up, standing on my driveway with his head down and his hands shaking. For the first time in years, Ethan didn't look like a man in control. He looked like the boy I once held after a nightmare. When I opened the door, he didn't speak. He just stood there, eyes red, face pale. "Dad," he finally whispered, "I lost everything." I said nothing. I just stepped aside and let him in. He sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd once taught him how to balance his first allowance. Only now, the lessons were heavier. "The house," he said quietly, "the cars, they're gone. The company's shut down. Patricia left with Matthew to stay with her parents." His voice cracked. "I ruined everything." I took a deep breath. "No, son. You didn't ruin everything. You just finally saw what was real." He looked up at me, tears brimming. "Dad, I was so wrong. I thought success meant doing it all without help. I thought independence meant pushing you away. But now I understand, I wasn't independent. I was blind. For a long time I just watched him. The same man who once called me outdated, who introduced me as just a neighbor. But sitting there, stripped of pride, I saw my son again. Not the entrepreneur, not the arrogant voice that broke me, just Ethan, my boy. I reached into my pocket and placed a sealed envelope on the table. His eyes widened. "What's this?" "Your second chance," I said. "Inside is a check for $500,000. Enough to start again, but not the way you think." He shook his head. "Dad, I don't deserve this." "You're right," I said. "You don't. Not yet. I'm not giving it to you, I'm giving you a promise. When you can look me in the eye and tell me you've rebuilt yourself with honesty, with humility, with respect, then that envelope will be yours." He cried then, quietly, the way men cry when words fail. "I'll earn it. I swear I'll earn it. But please, can Matthew still visit you?" I smiled faintly. "My door will always be open for him, and for you, when you remember that family isn't a contract, it's a choice." That day, Ethan left with nothing but his pride broken, and I stayed behind with something far more valuable: peace. Because sometimes love isn't about holding on. Sometimes it's about letting go just long enough for someone to find their way back. And he did. Months later, Ethan returned again, not with a check in hand, but with his son. Matthew ran up the steps shouting, "Grandpa," and wrapped his little arms around me. Ethan stood behind him, silent but smiling, the kind of smile that only comes from understanding what loss truly costs. For the first time in years, we sat together as a family. No money, no arrogance, just truth. Ethan looked at me and said softly, "You were right, Dad. The greatest gift wasn't your money. It was your silence. Because in that silence, I finally heard everything you tried to teach me. And in that moment, I knew, sometimes disappearing isn't the end of love. It's the only way it survives." If this story touched your red heart, don't scroll away. Smash that like button to show your support for every father who's sacrificed everything. Speech balloon comment below. What would you have done in Thomas's place? Round pushpin tell us what city you're watching from. Because love, respect, and family are lessons that belong everywhere. Backhand index pointing down. Subscribe for more powerful life stories that remind us what truly matters.